Welcome to U.S. History to 1877. In this course, you will survey the major themes, events, and ideas of American history through Reconstruction.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from Alan Brinkley's The Unfinished Nation, The American Yawp, and our course-assigned OpenStax U.S. History textbook. This lecture focuses on readmission, military districts, and the constitutional struggle over Reconstruction. The core question is this: who controls readmission after Civil War? A president seeking quick restoration, or a Congress demanding new political terms? The core competency is to summarize the terms by which seceding states were readmitted to the Union. Who controls readmission after Civil War? A president seeking quick restoration, or a Congress demanding new political terms? By 1867, Congress had decided that readmission could no longer be treated as a simple welcome home process. Presidential restoration had returned too many former Confederates to office too quickly, and the resulting governments had shown what they intended to do with that power. They passed black codes, obstructed civil rights enforcement, and tolerated or encouraged violence against freed people and white Republicans. Readmission therefore became a governed transition. Congress would decide who could vote, who could write the new constitutions, and which conditions had to be met before former Confederate states resumed full standing in the Union. That change was institutional before it was symbolic. The Reconstruction Acts of 1867 divided the former Confederacy, except Tennessee, into 5 military districts and placed Army commanders over the transition. Registration boards enrolled eligible male voters, including large numbers of black men for the first time. State conventions would then draft constitutions acceptable to Congress, and the resulting governments would have to ratify the 14th Amendment. These were not decorative conditions. They were designed to keep old elites from using ordinary elections and county power to retake the state before a new electorate and a new constitutional order existed. Military rule in a republic carried an obvious tension, and Republicans knew it. They were using the army to create the conditions under which civilian democracy might function more fairly. Critics called the policy coercive and unconstitutional, while supporters answered that the defeated South had already shown what unregulated local restoration meant. Readmission under congressional terms thus became one of the sharpest tests of federalism in the post-war period. The background to the military districts lay in the failure of the Johnson program between 1865 and 1866. Provisional governors had convened state meetings quickly, former Confederates had re-entered office, and legislatures had signaled that emancipation would be narrowed wherever local law allowed it. When those same legislatures rejected the 14th Amendment, many Republicans concluded that voluntary Southern moderation was a political fiction. The federal government had destroyed the Confederacy militarily, though it had not yet secured loyal Republican governments in the former Confederate states. Violence reinforced that conclusion. The Memphis Massacre of May 1866 and the New Orleans Massacre of July 1866 exposed the weakness of local protection and the readiness of white officials and mobs to attack black citizens. Bureau reports and Army correspondence describe threats to laborers, teachers, and community leaders across wide portions of the South. The point was no longer abstract. Congress had evidence showing that ordinary county and state authorities could not be relied upon to protect the people whose civil and political status Reconstruction was supposed to define. The Reconstruction Acts therefore functioned as an answer to a tried alternative, not as a speculative leap. Congress could have continued to protest Johnson's conduct while leaving Southern politics mostly in local hands. It could have relied on the courts or on a future shift in white Southern opinion. Instead, it chose supervision. Registration, convention rules, military review, and amendment ratification would replace the quicker executive path. The former Confederate states would return only after meeting conditions set by national authority. Supplementary legislation in July 1867 clarified how that process would work. Local commanders and registration boards would determine eligible voters, supervise elections for delegates, and review whether constitutions met congressional requirements. This follow-up changed events because the first act established the framework, while later statutes defined the administrative details that made convention politics possible. Reconstruction advanced through layers of legislation rather than through one dramatic decree. The administrative work was extensive. General John Schofield in Virginia, Daniel Sickles in the Carolinas, John Pope in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, Edward Ord in Mississippi and Arkansas, and Philip Sheridan in Louisiana and Texas each had to supervise transitions in large politically hostile regions. District commanders removed some civil officers, monitored local security, and oversaw the machinery by which eligible men could register. Military presence did not govern every local outcome, though it changed the balance of power enough to let new electorates take shape. Registration itself transformed political power. Black men entered political life by signing their names or marks onto federal rolls that recognized them as part of the electorate. Former Confederates who met disqualification standards could be excluded. White Republicans, Unionists, and Black voters then elected delegates to state conventions. These conventions wrote constitutions that reorganized apportionment, created or expanded public school systems, defined civil rights more broadly, and reshaped local governance. South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, and several other states saw substantial Black participation in these bodies, making readmission a process of actual political remaking rather than mere certification. The convention records show how broad that remaking could be. Delegates debated school taxation, homestead protections, office holding qualifications, militia organization, and county representation. In South Carolina, the convention created one of the region's most ambitious public school commitments. In Louisiana and Mississippi, Black delegates and white Republicans pressed for civil equality in transportation, jury service, and public life. These were not incidental additions to readmission paperwork. They were the substance of the new state order Congress hoped to protect. Readmission also intersected with the struggle over the presidency. Andrew Johnson opposed congressional Reconstruction and tried to weaken it through appointments and removals. Congress responded with the Tenure of Office Act in 1867, attempting to restrict the president's ability to dismiss certain Senate-confirmed officials without Senate approval. The immediate flashpoint became Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, who aligned more closely with congressional policy. When Johnson tried to remove Stanton and appoint Lorenzo Thomas in his place, the House impeached him in February 1868. The impeachment trial was part of the readmission struggle because it tested whether Congress could hold the executive to the policy it had imposed. If Johnson could break congressional control over the War Department, he could undermine the very military supervision on which the Reconstruction Acts depended. The Senate fell one vote short of removing him in May 1868. That acquittal preserved the presidency as an institution, but it also confirmed how fragile Reconstruction remained. A national project of supervised readmission was operating inside a constitutional system where enforcement still depended on narrow majorities, disciplined coalitions, and public willingness to sustain extraordinary measures. Readmission also had a calendar dimension that shaped political risk. States moved through different stages at different speeds, and delays could strengthen opponents who wanted fatigue to win where direct argument had failed. Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, North Carolina, and South Carolina returned to representation in 1868, while Virginia, Mississippi, and Texas took longer. Each delay meant additional bargaining over constitutions, local resistance, and federal patience. The process looked orderly from far away, though on the ground it was staggered, contentious, and vulnerable to interruption. The 15th Amendment reveals that readmission was never only about restoring seats in Congress. It prohibited denial or abridgment of the vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, and it authorized Congress to enforce that guarantee by legislation. During military Reconstruction, Black male suffrage had been a condition of Southern political re-entry. With ratification in 1870, that condition became a national constitutional rule. The transition moved from temporary supervision in specific states toward a broader constitutional principle, one intended to outlast military districts and convention politics. The text is strong in one direction and careful in another. It bars racial exclusion directly, though it does not create universal suffrage in the broadest sense, and it does not mention women. It also leaves open space for later devices such as literacy tests, poll taxes, intimidation, and fraudulent administration. Even so, the amendment changed events because it told the country that the post-war South could not be reconstructed on stable terms while Black men remained outside the electorate. Congress had learned from 1865 and 1866 that citizenship without political participation would remain highly vulnerable. The amendment also makes enforcement part of the constitutional story. Its clause empowering Congress to act shows that legislators expected resistance and did not trust local compliance. Readmission therefore remained linked to national oversight, even as formal military control receded. Voting rights would have to be policed through statutes, appropriations, prosecutions, and political will, not through constitutional text alone. That is why the amendment belongs beside the district system, rather than after it as a separate chapter. The districts created the electorate that made new conventions and governments possible. The amendment tried to preserve one major result of that supervised transition when the districts eventually faded. Together, they show Congress moving from temporary coercive structure toward a permanent constitutional claim, while still understanding that permanence on paper would mean little without the means to enforce it. By 1870, most former Confederate states had met the formal conditions of readmission. They had called conventions, written new constitutions, ratified the 14th Amendment, and accepted an electorate transformed by black male suffrage and national oversight. Black office holders entered local governments, state legislatures, and Congress. Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce from Mississippi symbolized that moment, though many lesser-known county officials, school trustees, and legislators did just as much to shape daily governance. Readmission under congressional terms had created a brief but real opening for biracial democracy. The achievements were substantial. Reconstruction governments expanded public education, revised tax systems, supported internal improvements, and tried to govern states whose fiscal and physical systems had been damaged by war. Opponents attacked these governments as corrupt, foreign, or imposed. Those charges sometimes reflected ordinary patronage problems, though they also functioned politically to delegitimize biracial government itself. Readmission had not only altered who sat in office, it had altered who counted as part of the political public. The limits remained severe. Military supervision could create an opening, though it could not guarantee lasting local safety once troops withdrew and national priorities changed. The impeachment struggle showed how easily federal resolve might fracture. The 15th Amendment created a constitutional rule, yet that rule still depended on enforcement. Readmission solved the formal problem of re-entry. It did not solve the deeper problem of whether the national government would keep defending the democratic order it had just helped build. The next phase of Reconstruction would show how institutions built from below, including schools, churches, and family networks, carried part of that burden while organized white opposition moved to break the experiment apart. The clearest consequence is that Southern readmission briefly changed who governed and how government looked. Men once excluded from politics served as convention delegates, legislators, and local officers, while public school systems and civil rights provisions entered state law under congressional conditions. Federalism itself was reinterpreted through supervision, registration, and constitutional review. Those outcomes were strong enough to provoke fierce backlash, and that backlash shows the experiment was real. Readmission was not a paper exercise. It was a genuine transfer of political possibility made under federal authority and left vulnerable when that authority weakened. One final detail sharpens that point. When Mississippi sent Hiram Revels to the Senate in 1870 and later sent Blanche K. Bruce to the same chamber, the symbolism was national, though the administrative foundation remained local. Registration boards had enrolled black voters, conventions had written constitutions, and congressional conditions had kept hostile state governments from closing the process too early. Readmission therefore changed the composition of power from the courthouse to Congress itself, even if the durability of that change remained uncertain from the start. Texas and Virginia, which returned later than some other states, underline the same lesson. Readmission was not one national gesture performed on a single day. It was a staggered and supervised process in which timing, military oversight, and constitutional compliance determined when a former Confederate state could recover representation and under what political conditions it would do so. Military districts and readmission rules briefly transferred real political possibility to people previously excluded from power. The harder judgment is whether supervised democracy can endure once the supervising power begins to tire, bargain, or retreat. Readmission opened the door under federal terms and left the future hanging on how long those terms would be defended.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.